Vertex snapping is an important function to understand, so let's take a look at how to use it to get the results that you're looking for. We're going to start with the default Blender scene. We're going to do Control I to invert the selection. Then we're going to do delete and choose delete. So now we just have the default cube. We're going to right click to select this cube, press tab to go into edit mode, and we're going to create another cube. So we're going to go to create and choose cube. This one we're just going to bring up on the z-axis by left clicking the blue arrow and bringing it up. I'm also going to change my view from perspective to orthographic by pressing 5 on the number pad, just because that's my preferred view to be using when I'm modeling. So in order to use vertex snapping, you're going to have to turn on vertex snapping down here by left clicking and changing this from increment, which is the default, to vertex. So you'll use the snap element of vertex. So now this is enabling vertex snapping. If you want to actually use vertex snapping while you're moving an object, you're just going to left click and drag on one of the arrows, hold control and hover over a vertex. You'll see this orange outline around a vertex that you're snapping to. Vertex snapping will behave differently depending on where the object you're moving is located before you move it. So when we move it on the y-axis in this position and snap to here, it actually doesn't change its y position at all because it was already perfectly aligned with that vertex. But if we move this object over first and then let go of the y-axis, and then we grab it on the y-axis again and try snapping it by holding control and hovering over this point, we'll now see that the result is actually different. So one important thing to be aware of with vertex snapping is the original position of your object that you're trying to snap actually makes a difference when you're trying to do vertex snapping. So if this was over here, for example, and we tried to do vertex snapping on that same point, you'll get a different result than if it's over here and then you try to do vertex snapping. So one way to think of how this works is it's going to be snapping the rightmost point in this case, or the closest point to this point is the one that's going to be snapped. So if it's the right side that's closest, it's going to snap the right side. If the left side is the closest, like these are now closer to this point than these over here, it's going to snap the left side in this case. We just did vertex snapping with only one axis that time. We did the y-axis, but you can actually use 2 or even all 3 axes at the same time if you'd like to. So for example, if we want to snap to this point and bring this point to that point, we're just going to bring it over on the y-axis so that this point is the rightmost or the closest to that. And then we're going to bring this back so that now this vertex is the closest vertex to this vertex. So now when we press G and hold control, it's going to snap that point perfectly on top of that point, because this is the point on the selected square that was closest to the snapping point. So when you press G, it's going to move it on all 3 axes at the same time, and when you hold control and snap it, it's going to snap all 3 axes perfectly onto that point. So if we want to practice vertex snapping a little, we can just do Shift D here, right click to cancel the movement. We're going to bring this all the way over on the y-axis just so it's a bit beyond this point. Then grab it on the y-axis, hold control, snap it there. So now we have this point perfectly snapped and this point perfectly snapped. So we're going to hold shift, right click to select this object, do control L. That's going to select all of it. Shift D to duplicate, right click to cancel. We're going to bring this forward. You just want to bring it beyond these 2 points. Then grab it on the x-axis, hold control and snap it there. So now we've just quickly made it a quick shape easily with vertex snapping. It would have taken a lot longer if we didn't use vertex snapping. So this is one of the benefits of vertex snapping, is it just speeds up your workflow and makes your movements very precise. If you want to move on only 2 axes at a time, you're going to have to do shift and then choose the axes which you want to exclude. I'll show you an example real quick. So I'm going to go back into edit mode by pressing tab. I'm going to hold shift, select one of these vertices, do control L, and we're going to delete these. So we're just going to do delete and choose vertices. So now we're back to just 2 cubes. I'm going to select the vertex here, do control L to select it, and I'm just going to move this out of the way again so it's not snapped to this vertex anymore. So in order to use only 2 axes at a time, let's say we want to use the Y and X, but we want to exclude the Z axis, you're going to do G to move it just as normal. Then you're going to do Shift and Z, and that's going to exclude the Z axis. So now you can see we have the green line and the red line, but we don't have the blue line for the z-axis. So now if we hold control and snap it here, it's going to perfectly align it on the y and x axis, but you'll see that there is still some distance on the z-axis because it's going to keep its original z position. So if you were to go over here and left click on this, or just press N to open up the properties panel with your mouse in this window, and go to the top and change this to global. If you look at this vertex, so just right click to select it, and you look at all the values, so you have x1, -1, y -1, and then z is this value. If you look at this vertex, you'll notice it's actually the same. The x and y value are exactly the same, and the only one that's different is the z-axis, and that's because we excluded the z-axis when we did vertex snapping. I'm going to press the N key to close this panel, so with your mouse over here just press N, and I'm going to show you a different function of vertex snapping that's extremely helpful in a lot of cases, and that is helping you center things on an object. So for example, we're going to do Control L and we're going to scale this down on the y-axis, so we're going to do S and then Y and scale this down on the y-axis. So let's pretend that we want the center of this perfectly in the center of this. So you want half of this object to be to the left and half to be to the right. But that would be kind of difficult by doing it by eye. It'd be practically impossible sometimes. So I'm going to show you an easier way and quicker way to do it with vertex snapping. So one thing you're going to do is do Control R, and then you're just going to left click and right click. Whenever you add in an edge loop and do left click, right click, it perfectly centers it between the two surrounding edge loops. So this is now perfectly in the center because these two are both equally on the left and right. So now we're going to select this vertex, do Control L, and if you do vertex snapping normally, you'll notice it only snaps the edge. So if we put the object on this side and try to snap it, it's going to snap this edge. If we put it on this side and then snap it, it's going to snap the left edge. And in this case, that's not what we want. We actually want it to snap the center of this object. To do that, and in order to change the functionality of vertex snapping, what you can do is actually go down here and change this from the default, which is median point, and change this to individual origins. So if you change this to individual origins, vertex snapping is actually going to behave differently. So now if we grab this and hold Control and then snap it here, you'll notice that something happens. It's not snapping the left or the right, it's actually snapping the center to this set of vertices, which is exactly what we want in this case. To prove that, you can press N to go to the properties panel, select one of the vertices, see that the Y position is now this value, and select the opposite vertex, and it's now the negative position, which means it's equally on the left as it is on the right. So it's equally far away from the center of the Blender world, to the right and also to the left. You could also add in an edge loop to further prove this by doing Control R, left click, right click, and just see that the Y value of the center of this object is now at exactly 0. So let's take a look at a couple different uses for vertex snapping. So we're going to go to face select, and I'm going to select one of these faces. I'm going to do I to do an inset and just inset this a bit. Then I'm going to do E to extrude, right click to cancel, and bring this out. So let's say we want this to be, duplicated multiple times, fitting up right up next to each other, so that we have a bunch of these, making a line of them basically. So one way to do this, you could use the array modifier. You could go up here, click on the wrench, add modifier, and choose array. And you could do it that way, but it wouldn't work so well because we have this other object here. So in this case, one way we could do it instead is just do Control L to select this whole object, Shift D to duplicate, right click to cancel, bring it over here, and switch this to median point. Then we're going to grab it on the y-axis, hold Control, and snap it there. So now it looks like these two objects are repeating, or this object is repeating itself once, as if you had an array modifier with one extra object here. And you can just do that as many times as you want. You can do Shift D and Y and bring it over here, and then snap it again by grabbing on the y-axis, holding Control, and snapping it there. So just grab it on the y-axis, hold Control, snap it there. And you could repeat that process as many times as you wanted until you had a whole bunch of squares with a little square repeated and creating a new object. Another use for this would be, for example, let's say this is a table and you want to put a glass of water perfectly on top of this. So what we're going to do is we're just going to create a circle. So go to create, choose circle, it's going to create a circle here. You can change the vertex count if you want, or you can just leave it the way it is. Just bring it up and then we're just going to scale this down a bit, so do S to scale this down. I'm going to switch to Vertex Select. We're going to do E to extrude, right click to cancel and bring this up, S to scale it out. So we're going to try to make sort of a cup shape here. It's not going to be perfect, but that's alright. And I'm going to do Control L and Control N to recalculate the normals. Since that didn't work, I'm going to do Mesh Normals and Flip Normals. And as with most cups, the bottom would be filled in. So I'm going to do Alt right click and then just do F real quick to fill that in. So let's pretend this is a cup of some sort and we're trying to put the bottom perfectly on this table here. So we're going to do Control L and just grab it on the Z-axis, hold Control and snap it there. And now, just like that, the cup is now perfectly on the table. There's no space in between the table and the cup. Everything is looking good. One of the options you have when using vertex snapping is to be able to change the target. So down here, this is where the target is. The default is closest, which is what we've been using so far. So it'll take the closest vertex, in other words, these bottom vertices here, and snap it to the bottom, or snap it to this vertex there. But you can also change this to be center, median, or active. So this is the snap target. So if we change this to center and then we use this, grab it on the Z-axis, hold Control, it's going to actually snap the center of this cup to that vertex instead of using the closest vertex as the snap target. So that's pretty much exactly the same as switching this to individual origins. It's going to be actually exactly the same. So switching it to center or median, I believe they're pretty much the same. I don't know exactly what the difference is, but they seem to work pretty much the same. Center and median, pretty much the same result regardless of which one you choose. Then there's active, and that's a little bit different. You see all the vertices in orange, and then there's one that is white right here. This is considered the active vertex, and it would be the same for if you were in edge select or in face select. So this white edge would be the active edge, and these two would be the not active edges. They'd be in orange. So the one that's in white is always the active edge, or vertex, or face, whatever you're dealing with. So you can see that there's a difference in color for the face that is active versus the ones that are not. So I'm going to go back to Vertex Select, select one of these vertices, do Control L. And now we have the active vertex up at the top, and we have this set to active. So it's going to use the active vertex instead. And let's take a look at what happens. So when we grab it on the Z-axis, hold Control, it's now snapping that active vertex on the Z-axis to this vertex. So normally you would expect it to have the bottom of the cup being snapped, but in this case, holding Control and snapping it there, we end up with the top of the cup being snapped instead. So that's the difference between closest, center, median, and active. These two I'm not sure exactly what the difference is, but usually if I want to snap something to the center, I just switch it to individual origins, and that works just fine for me. So I'm going to switch this back to median point. Another option you have is to snap onto itself. And this is on by default. It just allows you to snap parts of an object to other parts of the same object. So right now, we're in edit mode. All these objects are actually part of the same object. So if we tab into object mode and tab into edit mode, this is all part of cube right here, number 1 cube. This is all the same object technically. So we can snap to this object right now because this option is turned on. If we were to turn this option off, you can't snap to the same object anymore. So instead of doing that, you'd have to tab into object mode, create another object. So I'll just create another cube, tab into edit mode and just move this over, move it up some, move it back some maybe. Tab into object mode, select this object again by right clicking it, tab into edit mode, and now if we move it on the Z-axis, hold Control, you can see I can snap to this other object now. You can see these yellow circles which are indicating that we're able to snap to these vertices, but we still can't snap to the same object. So by default this is on. It allows you to snap to the same object, but if you turn it off you can only snap to a different object. It's usually best to keep this option on because if we turn it on real quick, you'll notice we can still snap to other objects, and we can also snap to the same object. So it's nice to just keep this on. It's on by default. You don't have to worry about changing it. This is the default functionality of vertex snapping. The next option is to align the rotation with the snapping target. So if we turn this on and we grab it on the Z-axis, hold Control, we're going to get this funny little shape because it's just going to be trying to align the rotation with the vertex normal of this vertex. So if you're not sure what vertex normals are, it's basically just the direction of the vertex or face. If it's a face normal, it would be the direction of the face. And in order to see visually what a vertex normal is, we're just going to go down here with this panel. You just press N to open up this panel or close it. And we're going to go down to Mesh Display, and then you're going to see this Normals option. If you left click on this one, this is the one for vertices. This is the one for vertex per face normal, and this is the one for face normals. So if you turn this on, you can see the face normals. We're not interested in that at the moment, so I'm going to turn that off. We just want these vertex normals. So you can see this vertex normal is pointing in that direction. So when we press G and hold Control, it's going to snap and try to get the orientation to be the same. So you notice this yellow line that's created, or orange line that's created, is exactly the same direction as this normal direction. So if we do G and hold Control, it's going to make a line that's in the same direction. And we're going to end up with this funny half ice cream cone shape and whatever this is. So if that's what you want, great. If not, just do Control Z and we'll get our cup back. So if you try that with any of the other vertices, just press G, hold Control, snap it there. You can check out what some of the different positions will create. I'm not really sure where this would be useful, but I'm just telling you that this is a function that's there, and I'm sure there's probably some uses for it. I'm just not aware of them. So I'm just going to right click to set this back. I'm going to turn off the vertex normals because we're done with that. And I'm going to press N to close this panel. The next option is to automatically merge vertices when they're moved to the same location. So for this one, we're actually going to turn off this option. So just left click and turn that off. And then we're going to turn this on by just left clicking here. So what this option does is that when two vertices are perfectly on top of each other, it's going to merge them together. So if we do G and move this, hold Control and snap it there, may not look like anything has actually happened, but if you go over here and select this vertex and try to move it, you'll notice it's actually part of both of these objects. It's part of this cube here, and it's also part of our cup. And that's because these vertices move to the same location. So I'm going to do Control Z and do Control Z again to get rid of that. And we'll see where this might be useful. So we have our little example up here. I'm going to select one of these vertices, do Control L. We're going to do Shift D to duplicate, right click to cancel. And I'm going to bring this over on the y-axis. Then I'm going to do S, Y, and -1 to flip it on the y-axis and press Enter. I'm going to do Control N to recalculate the normals. And with this option enabled, when I move this and snap it to here, these four vertices on the left are going to merge with these four vertices on the right. So if you want to just grab it on the y-axis, hold Control and snap it there. Now if you try to alt right click here or just select all these vertices with Z for wireframe, you'll see there's only four vertices here when originally we had four part of this object and four part of this object. So if you grab it on the y-axis, hold Control and snap it there, these are automatically going to be merged together. The last option, which is actually the first option, is to snap during transform. So transform just means whenever you're moving the object, it's going to automatically snap it. So if we turn this on by left clicking it, and then I'm going to do Control Z a couple times to move this object back over here, or you can just duplicate this again and move it over here just like it was. But now if we grab it on the y-axis, and I'm not even holding Control this time, but you'll see it's automatically snapping it. So that's what this option does. If you turn this on, it's going to automatically snap it without having to hold Control. So if you plan to do a lot of vertex snapping, you can just turn this on and it's going to snap it automatically without having to hold Control. So if you want to turn it off again without actually clicking this button, it's going to be the opposite. So normally you have to hold Control to snap. If you hold Control while that's on, it's going to disable snapping. So in this case, holding Control is going to disable the snapping, when usually holding Control will enable the snapping. So holding Control is just going to do the opposite of whatever this is. If this is on, it's going to turn it off. If it's off, it's going to turn it on. So just be aware of that this option is going to make it snap every single time. So if that's what you want, go ahead and turn this on. That's it for vertex snapping. I hope you learned a lot. Make sure to use this all the time. I use it pretty much every model I make, I'm always using vertex snapping. One of the most important things to make things line up properly. The settings that I usually use is I'll turn this off, that's the default. I'll change this to vertex, and this is closest for me usually. This is on by default, and I leave it on, and I turn this one off. So those are the settings that I use. You can use whatever settings you want. Based on the situation, you may want to use different settings. So you may want to have this on, for example, or if you feel like merging things all the time, turn this one on. I hope you learned a lot, and if you have any questions, as always, make sure to leave a comment in the comments section. Don't forget to join us on my Discord server, or send me an email if you need any help. That's it for this tutorial, so I'll see you in the next one. Thank you to our awesome Patreon supporters. If you'd like to become a Patreon supporter yourself, head on over to patreon.com/StephenBrooks. Thank you for your support.